I was never really into hack and slash games. I just didn't find it fun to mash buttons just to chip away at health of spongy enemies over and over again. That is, until about a decade ago, when Metal Gear Rising came out. I had a horrible laptop at the time that was definitely not made for heavy gaming, especially to play something as demanding as Rising, but I played through the whole game anyway, even though my laptop was practically burning on low settings. Metal Gear Rising was just so ridiculously fun that it completely changed my perspective about the genre, and I've been diving into more titles like it ever since. I decided to revisit the game 10 years later, just to see if it holds up, and wow, I really think that the game is going to be one of those timeless experiences. So Metal Gear Rising takes place a few years after Metal Gear Solid 4, a game that I still haven't played, so I have no idea about the Guns of the Patriots incident and a bunch of other political stuff that happened. But anyway, you play as Raiden, who's been contracted to protect the Prime Minister of a country in Africa. Things go wrong real quick, so Raiden has to fight off a bunch of super soldiers, mechs, and cyborgs like himself. And then the rest of the story goes all over the place. I could be wrong, but I feel like even people who played MGS4 would have been just as confused as I was throughout most of the game. One minute, the game would have the most awesome cutscene playing. Then suddenly, it gets all goofy while the characters would start monologuing about terrorism and other political views. I had no idea what they were talking about most of the time, but I was absolutely hooked since the whole game was just dumb fun. Like, sitting through a lengthy cutscene with crazy stuff going on was already entertaining, but the fast-paced gameplay in between those scenes made things even better. Metal Gear Rising will have you going through missions and running from point A to point B, slicing away at enemies or sneaking up to them. When you kill everyone and everything in one section, then you can move on to the next area. Defeating enemies involves using Raiden's sword and his heals to perform stylish combos. Light and heavy attacks lead to a bunch of different moves, but my favorite mechanic was definitely Blade Mode. It slows down time and lets you slice and dice everyone you come across, both cyborgs and mechs. And the most useful part is you can take out their spines, which Raiden crushes to restore his health. Defeating every enemy in each area will give you your combat results, which earn you points that you can use to upgrade Raiden's abilities and his weapons. You can even equip a second weapon later on, which I totally didn't forget to do until the very end of the game. Now the bosses. Rising has incredibly memorable bosses, and it's not just because of their cutscenes and character designs. Each boss fight was unique and fun in their own way. Like, it's been literally 10 years since I played this game, yet I still remember a lot of the fights. And yes, even that one infamous boss that made my teenage self lose her sanity from parrying. The boss fights were very flashy, and you can survive by just fighting them off in any way that you can. But others really tested you to see just how familiar you are with the game's mechanics, whether it was parrying or blade mode. Some of the bosses would punish you if you didn't know how to do them properly. But even though some of them were a little stress-inducing, it made everything so much more rewarding when you finally defeated them. So yeah, both the boss fights and the combat in Rising was insanely fun and adrenaline-inducing. But my three biggest enemies in the game were the camera, parrying, and the button mashing. It has this problem where the camera would be really janky when you get too close to walls or other objects. It really ruined the flow of certain fights when I just couldn't see what was happening. Now the parrying, it kind of felt like it didn't work sometimes, so I'd end up just getting smacked away even though I was timing it properly. Oh, and the button mashing. Oh god, the button mashing. My thumbs were giving up, especially in the QTEs and later boss fights. There was just so much dodging, parrying, and button mashing that my thumbs literally ached by the time I was done with them. But it was so worth it because of how much fun the game was. So yeah, playing through Metal Gear Rising again after so many years was a great experience. The game didn't feel too dated at all. It still looks really good, especially on PC. I also liked how Raiden's gameplay and movement felt familiar too, as if they were blueprints for future Platinum Games titles like Nier Automata. And the soundtrack of Rising is just It's so good that I've been listening to it every now and then for years. It took me around 13 hours to beat Rising, including the DLCs, which I will talk about soon, but I think the main game alone is 7 to 8 hours long. It's a short game, but I thought it was almost perfectly paced. There were very few sections that I didn't find fun or entertaining, and even when it had a few boring parts, the game's so short and fast-paced that it would quickly move on to the next big thing. If you want a fun, heart-pumping hack-and-slash game with memorable characters, awesome fights, ridiculous cutscenes, an amazing soundtrack, and tons of replayability, then you should definitely try Metal Gear Rising. It's on PC, PS3, and the Xbox 360. Now, before I end the video, I'll be talking about the DLCs, starting with the VR missions, since I was not a fan of those. Slight spoilers for anyone who hasn't played the main game, by the way. So, VR missions in Metal Gear Rising felt more like optional challenges that you could do if you want more out of the game. The objectives for each mission would be like, kill all cyborgs, sneak around and kill all cyborgs, or reach the waypoint as fast as you can. They just weren't fun for me since I was never really into things like time trials in games. It doesn't help that since they're supposed to be VR simulations, the levels don't visually look interesting. Everything's just yellow and blocky. But if you're the type who wants more challenges from Rising and even more replayability, then you might enjoy this. The next one I played is Jetstream Sam's DLC. I never actually played this DLC until now, and I didn't even know that Metal Gear Rising had DLC other than VR missions. So yeah, finding out about this and the Blade Wolf DLC was exciting, even though my excitement for this particular DLC slowly drained as I played it. The DLC is basically one big job application for Jetstream Sam to join the Senator and his buddies. It has a few new cutscenes, and most importantly, you get to play as Jetstream Sam himself. It's a linear experience where you'll be going through the same areas in the main game. The difference is, the game's much harder. Enemies and bosses are way more difficult. Playing as Sam is really cool though. He has similar moves to Raiden, except he can quickly draw his sword and do charge attacks. But that's it, really. I didn't like how the DLC recycled boss battles from the main game. It made it feel like they really overstayed their welcome, and I especially didn't like that I had to fight a really iconic boss again, but they're even more difficult. I know it might be obvious who I'm talking about, but I'll still try to keep it vague anyway. The greatest thing about fighting the iconic boss in the main game is that they actually had a personality there. The ridiculous cutscenes, combined with their monologuing and just everything that happened in that fight, made it memorable. Putting the same fight in the DLC with little to no new mechanics, cutscenes, and dialogue just felt cheap. I'd say most of the DLC felt like a cash grab, which is sad since I really liked Jetstream Sam, and I was looking forward to knowing more about him and why he joined the Senator. All the DLCs are included in the PC version, but it made me feel bad for anyone who did buy this as a full-priced standalone experience for consoles at the time and was expecting something more. There's one thing that I'm thankful for though. It was really short. I think it took me maybe just over an hour to complete. I do regret starting it on the normal difficulty though, because I wasn't having fun with it, and the game was constantly giving me a hard time with all the tanky enemies and recycled boss battles. The whole experience felt pointless in the end. I don't recommend playing through this DLC, unless you know what you're getting into and you want a bit more Metal Gear Rising content. Now the last one I played is the Blade Wolf DLC. I learned my lesson with the difficulty level in the previous one, so I started this on easy mode. So this DLC has you playing as Blade Wolf, who's training under Mistral and doing a bunch of VR missions. When his AI develops, he starts wishing to be free, so he tries to find a way out of everything. Just like Jetstream Sam, this one has unique cutscenes and all new gameplay. I'd say it's even more interesting since you play as Blade Wolf, and I'm sure everyone agrees that he's a good dog. You'll get to maul enemies, do tail whips, and use his chainsaw to cut everyone up. Now as cool as it is to play as him, the whole thing suffers from the same things as Jetstream Sam's DLC. It's bad enough having to go through the same areas, but you also had to do VR missions, which you all know I just didn't enjoy. It didn't help that the game wanted you to sneak around and do some platforming in certain areas. Metal Gear Rising's just not meant for stealth, or anything like that, and it's not because I'm awful at sneaking around in games. I've lost count of the amount of times I've been spotted in both the main games and the DLCs, even when I was clearly not out in the open. Some enemies move fast, jump around, and patrol in a way that makes it difficult to perform takedowns, unless you can do it perfectly and get lucky. I know I complained a lot, but I still enjoyed the experience since it didn't feel worthless to play through. Unlike Jetstream Sam's DLC, there's a completely new boss here too, that I won't mention because spoilers. The boss fight wasn't as memorable as the ones in the main game, but it was still a welcome addition. I also liked that the story didn't feel meaningless since it was directly connected to the main game's ending. So yeah, even though Blade Wolf's DLC recycled a lot of stuff, I'm glad that it added new content, and it actually made the whole experience matter at the end of the story. I still wish that it did more though, since it was only about an hour long, but I guess it's the same feeling I had with Jetstream Sam's DLC. Their characters could have been expanded on so much more. It's a shame that they were but if I had to recommend which DLC is best, I'd definitely pick Blade Wolf. I swear, they did Jetstream Sam dirty. Mistral's butt had more screen time and character development. Let me know what you thought about the video, and thank you to my patrons at Patreon for supporting my channel. And if you haven't already, like and subscribe to support my channel. I've always wanted to replay Metal Gear Rising actually, especially to make a video on it, since I figured it would be fun to share my thoughts about the game since, you know, I really liked it. I was completely obsessed with it in my teens, so it was great being able to experience it again and share it with everyone. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.